The soft chime of church bells echoed across the sleepy little town of Willow Creek, a quiet American suburb where white picket fences lined the streets and neighbors gathered at front porches with sweet tea. But this morning, the town felt different. There was a sense of occasion, of glamour that seemed out of place against the modest backdrop of grocery stores, diners, and hardware shops. At the center of it all stood St. Matthew's Chapel, an old red brick church with stained glass windows that caught the early sunlight and spilled it into dazzling patterns of gold and blue. Outside, sleek black cars rolled up one by one, doors swinging open to reveal elegantly dressed guests in shimmering gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. Laughter filled the crisp autumn air as the wealthy families of Madison's social circle stepped out, clicking their designer heels on the cobblestones. Inside the church, the aisles were draped with ivory ribbons, the pews adorned with roses so white they seemed almost unreal. The scent of fresh lilies lingered in the air, mingling with the faint polish of old wooden benches. Candle stands glowed at every corner, casting soft halos around the saints carved into the walls. The scene looked like something out of a glossy bridal magazine, perfect in every way. At the front, the groom, Daniel Carter, stood tall in a classic navy suit. His hair was neatly combed back, his posture calm yet confident, though his dark eyes carried a depth that hinted at hidden storms. Unlike most of the guests, Daniel wasn't born into privilege. He was an architect who had fought his way up through scholarships, long nights in libraries, and endless hours on construction sites. To the wealthy families present, he was the boy who made good, but to Madison, he was the key to solidifying her image as a woman who had everything: beauty, brains, and now, a respectable marriage. And then, there was Clara. She arrived quietly, unnoticed at first, slipping through the back doors of the church. Her dress was clean but plain, a pale lavender fabric she had purchased years ago for special occasions. Her shoes were slightly scuffed from long hours of standing at her cleaning job at the hospital, and her hands, though she had scrubbed them carefully, still bore the faint cracks of years spent with detergents and mops. She held her purse close to her chest as she sat down on a bench at the very back, trying not to draw attention. Clara's eyes scanned the decorations, the chandeliers, the abundance of flowers, and she couldn't help but smile faintly. "She looks happy," she whispered to herself, imagining her daughter Madison walking down the aisle in the gown she had probably dreamed of since childhood. For Clara, this day wasn't about her, it was about Madison finally having the life Clara had always wanted her to have. A life untouched by struggle. A life far from the small, cluttered apartment where Madison had grown up. But as she sat there, Clara felt the weight of stares. A few of the guests glanced in her direction, some whispering softly. They didn't recognize her as Madison's mother at first. She didn't fit the picture. No designer jewelry, no expensive perfume, no polished presence that matched the rest of the glamorous crowd. She shrank further into the shadows of the pew, her heart beating faster, as though her very existence might disturb the perfection of the day. Meanwhile, near the altar, Madison Reynolds adjusted the veil pinned neatly into her dark, flowing hair. She was the picture of grace, dressed in a gown that shimmered with every movement. Her makeup was flawless, her smile practiced to perfection. The bridesmaids fussed around her, complimenting her elegance, her figure, the way she seemed to belong in a magazine spread. Madison beamed, soaking in the praise like sunlight. Yet, under that glow, her thoughts drifted uneasily. Would Daniel's family truly see her as their equal? Would his colleagues from the city be impressed by her poise? These questions weighed on her far more than any concern about the vows she was about to take. To Madison, this wedding was not just a union of love, it was her stage. And she intended to perform perfectly. When the organ began to play, the congregation rose to their feet. Madison appeared at the grand wooden doors of the chapel, her veil glistening under the sunlight streaming through stained glass. Guests gasped in admiration, phones discreetly lifted to capture the moment. As she walked down the aisle, her smile widened. Every step was deliberate, every glance rehearsed. But her eyes never once drifted to the back, where Clara sat with trembling hands clasped together. For Madison, her mother's presence was a necessary inconvenience, one she hoped would remain unnoticed among the glitter of high society guests. Daniel, however, noticed. His gaze flickered from Madison's dazzling walk to the humble figure sitting quietly at the back. His lips pressed together, as though he was holding back words he wasn't ready to speak. The ceremony began. The priest spoke of love, of sacrifice, of unity. Madison nodded at all the right places, but her thoughts swirled with the weight of appearances. Clara's heart swelled with emotion, remembering Madison as a little girl in a thrift store dress, holding her hand at the very same church during Sunday school. Now here she was, radiant, admired by all. Clara whispered a prayer of gratitude, her voice trembling, "Thank you for letting me see this day." The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side of the church, chandeliers, silk gowns, laughter that rang with privilege. On the other side, a solitary mother in simple clothes, carrying scars of labor and sacrifice. Wealth versus poverty, pride versus humility, the American dream shining bright at the altar while its price sat quietly in the back pew. And though no one knew it yet, beneath this carefully constructed scene of perfection, secrets were stirring. The bride's heart was not as flawless as her gown, the groom's silence held stories yet untold, and the humble mother at the back carried truths that would shake the foundations of this perfect wedding. The narrator's voice, soft but firm, cut through the golden glow of the ceremony. Every wedding tells two stories, the one the guests are meant to see, and the one hidden in the shadows. Today, the shadows are about to speak. Madison Reynolds had always been admired. In high school, she was the girl everyone wanted to sit with at lunch, the one whose yearbook photo looked like it belonged in a fashion campaign. Her classmates would whisper, "She's going places," and Madison believed them. But beneath the flawless image she carefully built, there was a truth she buried deep: she hated being poor. Her childhood was spent in a modest apartment in the working-class part of town. The walls were thin, the neighbors loud, and the refrigerator often half-empty. Her mother, Clara, worked exhausting shifts, first as a cleaner at the local hospital, later picking up part-time jobs at diners and laundromats, just to keep food on the table. Madison remembered nights when the electricity bill went unpaid, and they lit candles at the kitchen table while Clara assured her, "It's just for tonight, sweetheart. Tomorrow will be better." But for Madison, those candles weren't comforting, they were humiliating. She dreaded the mornings when her mother dropped her off at school in their rattling, rust-speckled sedan. Other kids' parents pulled up in shiny SUVs, fresh coffee in hand, tailored suits gleaming. Clara, with her tired face and uniform that smelled faintly of bleach, was a reminder of everything Madison wanted to escape. By the time Madison entered her teenage years, she had made a silent vow: she would never let poverty define her again. She studied harder than anyone, not out of passion but out of desperation. She networked, she joined every club that mattered, she learned to speak with confidence and carry herself like the wealthy girls whose families owned half the town. On the surface, she looked like she belonged. Inside, she still carried the shame of where she came from. College was her first taste of the life she dreamed of. At the University of Boston, she was surrounded by students from well-off families. She told no one about her background, carefully editing her story so it sounded like she, too, came from comfort. She learned to shop second-hand in upscale neighborhoods, choosing brands that gave the illusion of wealth. She avoided inviting friends home for holidays, always making excuses. And slowly, she built a new version of herself, one polished, confident, and untouchable. But Clara never stopped supporting her. Madison's scholarships didn't cover everything, so Clara worked double shifts, sending money whenever Madison hinted she needed a little extra. Clara skipped dentist appointments, wore her shoes until they had holes, and lived on instant noodles, all so her daughter could attend networking dinners and buy the textbooks that cost more than Clara earned in a week. Madison knew this. Deep down, she remembered every envelope that came in the mail with her mother's neat handwriting, every care package filled with homemade cookies and thrift store scarves. But instead of gratitude, those reminders fueled her embarrassment. She never showed her college friends the return address on those envelopes. She hid her mother's voice on voicemail. She told herself, one day, when I'm successful, none of this will matter. And then came Daniel. They met at an alumni event hosted by one of Madison's wealthier acquaintances. Daniel, at first glance, was not like the other men she had dated. He wasn't born into money, but his calm confidence and sharp wit made him stand out in the room full of loud, entitled heirs. He spoke with passion about his work as an architect, about designing affordable housing projects, about giving back to communities that reminded him of his own childhood. For Madison, he was a puzzle piece she didn't expect. He was successful, respected, but humble. He had the kind of reputation that opened doors. With Daniel by her side, Madison could cement her place in the social circles she had been clawing her way into for years. And yet, despite the perfection of her plan, there was one thorn in her flawless image: Clara. Every time Madison imagined introducing Daniel to her mother, she hesitated. What would he think, seeing the tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper? What would his colleagues say if they discovered that Madison's elegant charm was built on a foundation of scrubbing floors and second-hand shoes? So Madison began distancing herself. Phone calls to Clara became shorter, often rushed. Visits home were fewer. She convinced herself that she was busy, that success demanded sacrifices. In truth, she was ashamed. Clara noticed, of course. Mothers always do. She never complained, never accused Madison of forgetting her roots. Instead, she simply said, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I know you're busy. Just don't forget to eat." That unconditional love only deepened Madison's guilt, but guilt was something she had learned to silence. She told herself she was doing this for both of them. If I rise high enough, Mom will rise with me, she reasoned. She'll never have to feel poor again. But in her relentless climb, Madison began to lose sight of the truth: love and dignity could not be bought, and respect was not something earned through money alone. Now, on her wedding day, standing in the dressing room surrounded by bridesmaids and luxury she once only dreamed of, Madison felt invincible. She had made it. Every struggle, every humiliation, every night she cried into her pillow, it had all led to this moment of perfection. She looked in the mirror and whispered to herself, "You're not that poor girl anymore. Today, you are everything you were meant to be." Yet in the very same church, at the very back, sat the woman who had made it all possible, the one Madison refused to acknowledge. Clara's love had built the foundation for Madison's success, but Madison had chosen to see it as a weakness rather than a strength. And as the ceremony continued, Clara's simple lavender dress stood in stark contrast to the satin gowns and pearls around her. She was invisible to her daughter, erased from the narrative of Madison's perfect life. What Madison didn't know, what no one yet knew, was that this choice, this erasure of the woman who gave her everything, would soon unravel the very image she had fought so hard to protect. The night before the wedding, the Reynolds family hosted a lavish rehearsal dinner at the Willow Creek Country Club, the most prestigious venue in the county. Its wide, manicured lawns overlooked a sparkling lake, and the building itself looked like an old southern mansion with white pillars, sprawling verandas, and a chandeliered ballroom that glowed like gold through tall glass windows. The parking lot filled with luxury cars. Guests stepped out in sleek cocktail dresses and polished leather shoes. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne flutes through the crowd, their movements precise, rehearsed, as though even the staff were part of the performance of wealth. Inside, a long banquet table stretched beneath a massive chandelier, its crystals scattering light like diamonds. Plates gleamed with gold rims, silverware was polished to perfection, and each chair bore a small embossed card with a guest's name. This was not simply a rehearsal dinner, it was a display of status, of Madison's arrival into a world she had long chased. But at the farthest end of the room, away from the laughter and clinking glasses, sat Clara. She had arrived quietly, as always, wearing the same lavender dress from earlier in the day. She had combed her hair neatly, dabbed on a bit of drugstore lipstick, and pinned her purse under the table so it wouldn't slide onto the polished floor. Her eyes darted nervously from the ornate decorations to the high-heeled women laughing easily with one another. Clara felt out of place, like a misplaced puzzle piece forced into the wrong picture. When Madison introduced her to Daniel's family, the moment was painfully awkward. "This is my mother, Clara," Madison said quickly, her voice tight, as though the words themselves embarrassed her. "She doesn't really do much. But she's here." The words landed like stones. Daniel's mother, Margaret Carter, raised her eyebrows politely and gave Clara a quick handshake before turning back to her circle of friends. To her, Clara was unremarkable, a woman whose hands told the story of labor and survival she had no interest in hearing. Clara smiled weakly, whispering, "It's nice to meet you," but her voice was drowned out by laughter across the table. Madison had already moved on, clinking glasses with bridesmaids, basking in compliments about her ring, her dress, her future. For Clara, the humiliation wasn't in the cold reception, it was in the look on her daughter's face. Madison hadn't just ignored her, she had erased her. Throughout the evening, Clara tried to blend in, nodding politely during conversations she wasn't invited to join. She listened to talk of vacations to Paris, of private schools in Boston, of investment portfolios and country club memberships. She sipped slowly at her water, too nervous to request wine. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, twisting it until it nearly tore. At one point, Clara mustered the courage to approach Madison. She gently touched her daughter's arm and whispered, "Sweetheart, you look beautiful tonight. I'm so proud of you." Madison stiffened, her smile never faltering for the crowd, but her eyes shot Clara a sharp warning. "Mom, please," she hissed softly. "Don't make a scene. Just sit down, okay?" Clara's hand fell away. She nodded quietly and returned to her seat, the compliment dying on her lips. But not everyone was blind. From across the table, Rachel Miller, Madison's childhood friend, watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. Rachel had grown up on the same block as Madison. She knew Clara well, she remembered the woman who had baked cookies for the neighborhood kids, who had driven Madison and Rachel to soccer games in that rattling old sedan, always cheering the loudest from the sidelines despite her exhaustion. Rachel had always admired Clara's strength. Seeing her now, dismissed and belittled, stirred something sharp inside her. Later, as Madison and her bridesmaids posed for pictures near the fireplace, Rachel slipped away and found Clara sitting alone near the dessert table. "Mrs. Reynolds," Rachel said softly, sitting beside her. "Are you okay?" Clara smiled, trying to mask the crack in her voice. "Of course, dear. It's Madison's big night. That's all that matters." Rachel frowned. "You don't deserve this. She shouldn't treat you like you're invisible." Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She shook her head, whispering, "She's all I have, Rachel. If staying quiet means she's happy, then that's what I'll do." Rachel's heart ached at those words. She wanted to argue, to demand that Madison recognize her mother's worth. But Clara's quiet dignity silenced her. There was no bitterness in her voice, only love, love that endured humiliation without protest. Back at the head of the table, Madison raised her glass as the guests applauded. She looked radiant, confident, completely at ease in this world of chandeliers and champagne. But behind her, her mother sat in silence, her pride swallowed by the weight of her daughter's shame. And at the far end, Daniel observed everything. His gaze lingered on Clara more than once. He saw her trembling hands, the way her eyes followed Madison with a mixture of love and longing. He saw how Madison's dismissive tone cut deeper than any cruel remark could. Daniel said nothing that night, but his silence was not indifference. It was calculation. He was piecing together the truth, watching carefully, storing it for a moment yet to come. As the evening ended and guests drifted out into the crisp night air, Clara waited for Madison by the door. She hoped for one small word, one small gesture of acknowledgement. But Madison swept past her, her arm linked with Daniel's, her laughter ringing through the night. She didn't even glance at her mother. Clara stood there, alone on the steps of the country club, the chill of the night biting her cheeks. She hugged her purse tightly to her chest, whispering to herself, "It's enough just to see her happy. That's all I need." But in that moment, under the glittering lights of wealth and privilege, the cracks in the perfect picture had widened. The world saw Madison as flawless, but Clara's silent tears told another story. And Daniel, walking quietly beside his bride-to-be, carried a truth in his eyes that would soon change everything. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and golden. The small town of Willow Creek woke to the sound of church bells, their notes rolling over rooftops and drifting through autumn-colored trees. By noon, St. Matthew's Chapel glowed like a jewel at the heart of the town. Its stained-glass windows shimmered under the sunlight, casting kaleidoscopes of color across the sidewalk where guests in silk gowns and tailored suits gathered. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The air was thick with perfume, cologne, and the scent of roses arranged in towering vases at every corner. The polished wooden pews gleamed, freshly oiled, while white silk ribbons lined the aisle like streams of light. At the altar, golden candlesticks burned steady flames, their glow softening the edges of the grand stone sanctuary. The guests murmured with anticipation. Madison Reynolds' wedding was the talk of the town. The daughter of a self-made woman, as Madison liked to phrase it when she omitted the reality of her mother's cleaning jobs, was marrying Daniel Carter, a man whose reputation as a successful architect carried both charm and weight. As the organ began its first notes, a hush fell across the church. Heads turned toward the grand wooden doors. And there she was. Madison stepped into the chapel, a vision of perfection. Her gown was an elegant masterpiece, ivory satin that shimmered like liquid under the stained glass, the train flowing behind her like a river of snow. Her veil cascaded down her shoulders, framing a face painted with flawless precision. She carried herself as though she belonged not to the small-town chapel but to the glossy pages of a bridal magazine. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Phones discreetly lifted to capture her entrance. Madison's lips curved into the faintest smile as she walked slowly, deliberately, down the aisle. Every step was measured, every glance calculated. She wasn't just a bride, she was performing. But if her eyes were the spotlight, they never once strayed toward the back pews. There, sitting quietly in lavender, was Clara. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them over her lap, her knuckles pale. She had woken at dawn to prepare, pressing her dress carefully, pinning her hair back in soft curls. She carried no jewelry, no designer clutch, nothing that glittered, only the quiet dignity of a mother's love. As Madison floated down the aisle, Clara's vision blurred with tears. Her heart swelled with memories, Madison's first steps in their tiny apartment, her middle school science fair where Clara had stayed up all night helping with a homemade volcano, the time she sewed Madison's prom dress with aching fingers because they couldn't afford the one from the boutique. Now here she was, radiant, admired, loved by all. Clara whispered, almost inaudibly, "Thank you, God. Thank you for letting me see this day." At the altar, Daniel stood tall in his navy suit. His posture was calm, but his eyes betrayed something else. They flicked briefly to Clara at the back, a quiet acknowledgement, almost a reverence. Then he looked back to Madison, who reached him with a smile bright enough to dazzle the crowd. The priest began. He spoke of love, unity, and sacrifice, the eternal vows of marriage. Madison nodded at all the right moments, her gaze drifting toward the guests and the camera flashes. Daniel, in contrast, listened intently, his jaw tightening slightly when the priest spoke of honoring family. When it came time for the vows, Madison's voice rang clear, smooth as silk. She promised love, loyalty, and devotion, words rehearsed and perfect, delivered with the precision of someone who knew how to captivate an audience. The congregation sighed with admiration. Then Daniel spoke, his voice steady, deeper, carrying weight. He spoke not just of love but of respect, of standing beside each other through joy and hardship. His words carried sincerity that made several guests dab at their eyes. The ceremony seemed flawless. The couple exchanged rings, hands trembling slightly as gold bands slid into place. The priest declared them husband and wife. Applause erupted, echoing off the chapel walls. But then came the moment that would shatter the illusion. As Madison turned to walk down the aisle with Daniel, radiant and triumphant, Clara rose from her seat. She wanted nothing more than to embrace her daughter, to whisper, "I love you," in her ear, to share the moment as every mother dreamed she would. Her steps were hesitant as she approached, her lavender dress brushing softly against the polished floor. She extended her arms, her voice gentle, "Madison, sweetheart." For a split second, Madison froze. Her smile faltered, just slightly. All eyes turned. The cameras captured the moment. And then, in a voice sharp enough to cut glass, Madison hissed, "Mom, please. Not now. Don't embarrass me in front of everyone. Just, go sit down." Gasps rippled through the church. The organ faltered for a beat. A few guests exchanged horrified looks, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Clara's arms fell to her sides, her face flushing crimson. She blinked rapidly, forcing back tears. With a small nod, she whispered, "Of course, sweetheart," and turned back toward her pew. Her footsteps echoed louder than the organ, louder than the murmurs, louder than the silence that hung heavy in the air. Daniel's jaw clenched. He glanced at Madison, but she avoided his gaze, fixing her smile back into place as though nothing had happened. The applause resumed, softer now, more hesitant, as though the congregation wasn't sure whether to celebrate or to mourn. Clara sat back down, her hands trembling, her heart aching. She pressed her fingers together, whispering another prayer, though this one carried no joy. "Please, just let her be happy, even if it breaks me." At the front of the church, the bride and groom posed for pictures. Madison leaned into Daniel, her smile wide, her laughter ringing again. To the cameras, she looked like the perfect bride in the perfect wedding. But to those who had witnessed the moment, something had cracked. The whispers began almost immediately, weaving through the pews. "Did you see how she spoke to her mother? Poor woman, she looked so heartbroken. I didn't know that was her mom." And at the center of it all stood Daniel, silent, his expression unreadable. His hand rested gently on Madison's back as the photographer snapped pictures, but his eyes were on Clara, still sitting in the last row, fighting to compose herself. The ceremony had ended, but beneath the flowers, beneath the smiles, beneath the perfection, the foundation had begun to crumble. The narrator's voice carried over the scene, soft and deliberate. A wedding is meant to unite families. But when pride takes the place of love, even vows spoken beneath the eyes of God cannot silence the truth waiting to be revealed. The wedding guests spilled out of St. Matthew's Chapel into the crisp afternoon air. The sky was flawless, pale blue with streaks of white clouds drifting lazily, as though nature itself had blessed the union. A limousine waited at the curb, its polished surface reflecting the bursts of camera flashes. Laughter and chatter filled the space as bridesmaids in flowing blush gowns adjusted their hair and groomsmen straightened their ties. But beneath the surface, a quiet unease rippled like an undercurrent. Inside the chapel, still lingering near the altar, Daniel Carter stood in silence. His hands rested at his sides, but his jaw was tight, his gaze distant. Guests passed him with congratulatory pats on the shoulder, with warm smiles, with the expected, "You're a lucky man." He responded with polite nods, but his eyes didn't shine with the joy of a newlywed groom. Instead, his mind replayed the moment like a broken reel, Clara's trembling hands reaching out in love, Madison's sharp dismissal, the audible sting of her words in front of everyone. "Mom, please. Not now. Don't embarrass me. Daniel clenched his fist slightly, so small a gesture that no one noticed. To most, the wedding was a spectacle of beauty. But to him, something sacred had been violated. Outside, Madison was radiant, chatting with guests, laughing as if nothing had happened. She held her bouquet high for the photographer, her veil catching the sunlight like spun silver. Every movement of hers was flawless, every smile rehearsed. She didn't look back once toward the chapel doors where her mother had retreated in humiliation. Clara lingered near the steps, her lavender dress standing out softly against the marble stone. She tried to hide behind a group of cousins, but her red eyes betrayed her. When Madison swept past with Daniel's arm linked through hers, Clara offered the faintest smile, timid, broken, but Madison didn't acknowledge it. She walked by as though her mother were part of the crowd, a stranger. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. As the limousine doors opened, Daniel placed his hand on Madison's lower back. To the onlookers, it looked like a gesture of intimacy. But up close, his touch was tense, deliberate. Madison leaned in, whispering through her perfect smile, "You need to keep your face straight. Everyone's watching. Don't ruin the pictures." Daniel didn't answer. He slid into the car beside her, the leather interior cool beneath his palms. The doors closed, muffling the outside noise. Silence filled the space between them, heavy, suffocating. Madison adjusted her veil, then glanced at him. "What's wrong with you? You're supposed to be smiling. This is our wedding day." Daniel turned to her, his eyes steady, unblinking. "I saw what happened in there." Madison stiffened, her hand freezing on her veil. "What do you mean?" He leaned slightly closer, his voice low, deliberate. "The way you spoke to your mother." Madison scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Daniel, please. Not now. You don't understand. She doesn't know how to act in settings like this. She's different. I couldn't let her embarrass me in front of everyone." Daniel studied her, his silence louder than any argument. His thoughts churned, dark and stormy. Different? That was the word she used for the woman who had raised her, worked herself to the bone to give her a better life? His chest tightened. He had seen Clara that morning, how carefully she had pressed her dress, how nervous her hands had been, how proud her eyes shone when Madison walked in. She wasn't different. She was love personified. But he said nothing. Not yet. At the reception hall, the celebration continued in dazzling fashion. Chandeliers glittered overhead, casting golden light across polished floors. Guests clinked champagne glasses, their laughter rising above the music. The tables gleamed with silver cutlery, each centerpiece an extravagant arrangement of roses and orchids. Madison thrived in the spotlight. She floated from table to table, greeting guests, laughing at their compliments. Her gown sparkled under the lights, her every movement graceful. She looked like she belonged in a fairy tale. Daniel, however, was a quiet shadow. He sat beside her during the toasts, smiling when expected, lifting his glass mechanically. His silence grew heavier, noticed only by a few observant eyes. One of his groomsmen, Mark, leaned in during a break. "Man, you good? You look off." Daniel forced a small smile. "I'm fine." But inside, he was far from fine. He watched Madison across the room, her laughter ringing like bells, her attention fixed on appearances, on charm, on everything superficial. She hadn't once approached her mother since the ceremony. Clara sat at the farthest table, surrounded by distant relatives, her smile fragile, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Every so often, Daniel's gaze would drift back to Clara. Each time, he caught the same image, a woman who loved silently, endured quietly, and suffered with dignity. And each time, the storm inside him grew stronger. The evening wore on. After the first dance, the cutting of the cake, the endless photographs, Madison finally returned to their table. She collapsed into her chair, fanning herself with her hand. "God, I'm exhausted," she muttered. "But worth it, right? This is everything I dreamed of." Daniel looked at her carefully, his voice calm but firm. "Was it worth breaking your mother's heart?" The words cut through the noise like a blade. Madison froze, her smile vanishing. She turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "Why are you bringing this up again? I told you, she would have embarrassed me. You don't get it. You didn't grow up like I did." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to speak, to unleash the truth that burned on his tongue. But he stopped himself. Not here. Not now. Not when the entire room was watching. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his silence screaming louder than any argument. Madison shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, forcing a laugh to cover her unease. But she could feel it, the wall rising between them. As the night drew to a close, guests departed with hugs and congratulations. Madison basked in their admiration, her pride swelling. But Daniel remained distant, his mind elsewhere. When they finally slipped away to their bridal suite, Madison sighed with relief, kicking off her heels. She twirled before the mirror, admiring herself one last time. "Look at me," she said, half to herself, half to him. "I was perfect today." Daniel stood by the window, staring out at the quiet town below, the moonlight silver on his face. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Perfect isn't the word I'd use." Madison spun around, startled. "Excuse me?" He turned then, his gaze sharp, unflinching. "You showed the world a beautiful bride. But I saw something else. I saw pride. I saw arrogance. I saw a daughter who couldn't show her own mother an ounce of respect." Madison's breath caught. Her cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came. Daniel stepped closer, his tone steady, controlled. "You think you can hide behind wealth, behind appearances. But I know the truth. And sooner or later, Madison, so will everyone else." The storm had begun. And though Daniel's voice was calm, beneath it roared the fury of a man who would not let injustice stand. The narrator's voice returned, solemn and foreboding. "Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the calm before a storm that will shatter illusions and reveal the truth hidden beneath." The reception hall glowed like a palace. Tall chandeliers cast shimmering halos of light across polished marble floors. The long banquet tables were dressed in white silk, each centerpiece a masterpiece of roses, orchids, and cascading candles. The air carried the scent of roasted lamb and vanilla buttercream, blending with the faint perfume of roses drifting from the bride's bouquet. Guests moved with effortless elegance, their laughter and chatter creating a symphony of celebration. To an outsider, the scene was flawless, picture-perfect, the kind of event that belonged in glossy magazines. But beneath the glitter, beneath the smiles and champagne glasses, shadows crept quietly. Daniel felt them. He had felt them since the ceremony. At the far end of the hall, Clara sat in silence. Her lavender dress shimmered faintly under the golden light, but her shoulders curved inward, her posture small, as if she wanted to disappear. She smiled politely at the distant relatives seated around her, nodding occasionally at their shallow words of comfort. But her eyes were glassy, distant. Each time her gaze drifted to Madison, now radiant in the center of the crowd, her lips trembled into a smile. A mother's pride tried to survive, but the wound was fresh, raw. She had been silenced in the one place she should have mattered most. No one noticed, except Daniel. At the head table, Madison was in her element. She laughed with bridesmaids, posed for endless photographs, and basked in the admiration of her guests. Every time someone complimented her dress or her beauty, her chin tilted slightly higher, her smile just a little wider. Daniel sat beside her, hands folded, his expression unreadable. Outwardly, he played the part of the groom, raising his glass when asked, nodding politely to toasts, even smiling faintly when photographers turned their lenses. But inside, he wrestled with a storm that refused to quiet. He watched Madison as she worked the crowd like a queen commanding her court. And then he looked at Clara, alone at the far table. The contrast was unbearable. Dinner was served. Waiters in white gloves moved with precision, delivering plates of roasted meat, seasoned vegetables, and golden potatoes. The clinking of forks against porcelain filled the air. During the meal, one of Madison's bridesmaids leaned toward her with a mischievous grin. "You were flawless today. Honestly, Madison, I've never seen a wedding like this. Pure perfection." Madison laughed, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted, perfection." Daniel's fork froze midair. The word scraped against him like steel. Perfection. That was all she cared about. He lowered his fork slowly, staring at his plate, his appetite gone. Across the hall, Clara took careful bites of her meal. She ate slowly, not because she was savoring, but because chewing gave her something to do, something to distract from the ache inside her chest. A cousin beside her whispered sympathetically, but Clara simply smiled, shaking her head softly, refusing to burden anyone with her pain. Her eyes flickered once more toward Madison. She saw her daughter laughing, radiant, untouchable. Clara's hand tightened around her fork. She didn't envy the wealth or the beauty or the admiration. She only longed for one thing, acknowledgement. The speeches began. The best man stood, lifting his glass high. His voice boomed with warmth, filling the room with humor and nostalgia. Guests laughed and clapped, the sound echoing like applause in a theater. Next, one of the bridesmaids spoke, recounting years of friendship, childhood stories, secrets and dreams. Madison's smile glowed brighter with each word, her eyes sparkling. She thrived in the praise, in the attention, in the flawless image painted of her. But then Clara's name came up. Not from the speeches, not from anyone at the head table, but in whispers at the far tables. A murmur passed like smoke. "Did you see what happened at the ceremony? I can't believe Madison spoke to her like that. Poor Clara. She looked so embarrassed." Daniel's ears caught every word. His fists tightened beneath the tablecloth. The whispers were growing, seeping into the celebration like poison, staining the perfection Madison had tried so desperately to create. When it came time for Madison to give her own speech, she stood gracefully, raising her glass. Her voice rang clear, filled with charm. She thanked her guests, praised the venue, admired the flowers, and honored her new husband. But not once, did she mention her mother. Daniel's eyes never left her. His jaw tightened with each passing word, his silence a pressure cooker ready to burst. He wanted to stand, to demand she speak the truth, to acknowledge the woman who had given her everything. But he didn't. Not yet. His silence was sharper than steel. Clara clapped politely with the others, her face neutral, her eyes lowered. The omission cut deeper than the insult at the church. It wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about erasure. After the speeches, the music swelled. The bride and groom were called to the dance floor. Guests cheered as Madison glided into Daniel's arms, her gown flowing like water. The spotlight followed them, casting them as the centerpiece of the night. Madison smiled up at him, expecting joy in return. But his face was still, his movements mechanical. "Smile," she hissed softly, through clenched teeth. "People are watching." Daniel leaned close, his lips near her ear, his whisper colder than the music around them. "They're watching, yes. And they see what I see." Madison stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" But Daniel didn't answer. He guided her across the floor with perfect precision, each step calculated, controlled. To the crowd, they were a vision of grace. But to those closest, to Clara, watching from her table, something was wrong. The dance was flawless, but the love behind it was absent. As the evening dragged into night, tensions thickened. Guests began to notice Daniel's distance, his silence, his gaze that lingered not on his bride, but on the woman at the far table who tried so hard to vanish. A murmur spread again. Some pretended not to notice, others leaned in curiously. The illusion of perfection was cracking. Madison sensed it too. Between laughs and dances, she glanced at Daniel, her smile faltering when she caught his expression. He wasn't the glowing groom she had dreamed of. He was a shadow, a storm contained only by restraint. And storms never stay contained for long. By the end of the night, when the last song played and the last guests trickled out, Madison collapsed into her chair with exhaustion. It was perfect, she said softly, to no one in particular. Absolutely perfect. Daniel didn't reply. He rose, offering his hand to her, his face unreadable. She took it, forcing a smile, but the warmth was gone. From the far end of the hall, Clara watched them leave. She didn't speak, didn't rise, didn't wave. She only sat in silence, her heart heavy, her dignity intact, her sorrow buried deep inside. The narrator's voice cut through the silence, low and haunting. Perfection is fragile. Beneath the glittering surface of celebration, cracks spread unseen. And once they break open, no amount of beauty can conceal the truth. The reception was over. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, all of it had faded into silence. The grand hall now stood empty, its chandeliers still glowing faintly, casting long, tired shadows across the polished floors. Flower petals lay scattered like fallen memories, trampled under hurried shoes. Clara walked slowly down the hallway leading to her small guest room at the estate. Her lavender dress, once bright beneath the lights, now looked muted, almost gray. She carried her clutch tightly against her chest, not out of necessity, but as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She passed groups of relatives chatting in hushed tones. Some smiled politely at her, offering the kind of shallow sympathy people give when they don't know what else to say. Others avoided her entirely, their eyes sliding away, unwilling to confront the ache that followed her like a shadow. Clara kept her head bowed, moving with quiet grace. She had mastered the art of silence, the ability to endure pain without letting it spill into the room. But inside, her heart trembled like glass. When she reached her room, she closed the door gently behind her. The muffled click echoed through the stillness like a seal, locking her away from the world. She leaned against the door for a long moment, her breath heavy, her eyes fixed on nothing. Finally, she moved to the bed. Sitting on the edge, she clasped her hands in her lap, staring at the faint shimmer of the sequins on her dress. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror across the room, tired, worn, but dignified. For years, she had dreamed of this day. She had imagined sitting in the front row, her daughter's hand in hers, tears of joy staining her cheeks as vows were spoken. She had imagined being called forward, embraced, celebrated as the woman who had raised Madison into the woman she was. She had imagined pride, not pain. Instead, she had been silenced. Her mind replayed the moment at the altar, over and over. Madison's voice, sharp, dismissive, cutting her down in front of the congregation. The sting of humiliation. The gasps from the pews. The silence that followed. Clara shut her eyes, pressing her hand against her chest as if to calm her racing heart. But the memory clawed at her, relentless. And then came the reception. Sitting alone at her table, clapping politely as speech after speech erased her existence. Watching her daughter dance, radiant, without ever once looking her way. Smiling to keep the tears from showing. No one saw. No one truly saw. Except Daniel. Her thoughts lingered on him now. The way his eyes had searched for hers across the room. The tension in his jaw as Madison spoke. The silence in his dance. He hadn't said a word to her, but in his silence, she felt an unspoken truth: he saw her. Clara wiped at her eyes quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. She had promised herself years ago that she would never let sorrow consume her in front of others. But now, alone, there was no one to see. The tears broke free. They slid slowly down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling. The sound of her sobs filled the quiet room, soft and muffled, but heavy with years of sacrifice, years of love, years of giving everything, only to be dismissed when it mattered most. Her tears were not just for tonight. They were for every birthday party she planned alone, every late night she worked 2 jobs to pay for Madison's education, every holiday she spent pretending everything was fine when the world was collapsing around her. She cried not just as a mother who had been humiliated, but as a woman who had been erased. After what felt like hours, the sobs quieted. Clara rose slowly, moving toward the window. She pulled the curtains aside, revealing the moonlit garden below. The flowers that had looked so vibrant earlier now stood still, pale in the silver light. She whispered softly, to no one but herself, only wanted to be seen. Her voice cracked, the words dissolving into the night air. She thought of Madison, her laughter, her stubbornness, her beauty. A part of Clara wanted to be angry, to curse her daughter for the cruelty. But love is complicated. Even in pain, her heart still clung to her child. That was the curse of motherhood, to love, even when unloved in return. On the dresser sat an old photograph, tucked carefully into her clutch. Clara reached for it now. It was a picture of Madison at 6 years old, wearing a paper crown from a school play. Her smile was wide, her arms outstretched proudly. Clara had been the one cheering loudest in the crowd that day. She traced the edges of the photo with trembling fingers. That little girl, where had she gone? When had she learned to bury her mother under layers of pride and perfection? Clara whispered again, her tears dripping onto the photo, "I miss you, my little girl." The night stretched on. From the distance, faint echoes of laughter and music still drifted from the last of the wedding guests lingering outside. Life moved on. The celebration continued for some. But for Clara, time stood still. She sat at the window until her tears dried, her face pale, her body heavy with exhaustion. Yet beneath the sorrow, something shifted quietly inside her. She was broken, yes. But not destroyed. Her silence was not weakness. It was strength. A choice. To carry her pain with dignity, to survive the erasure, to endure the shadows. One day, perhaps, Madison would see. One day, perhaps, Daniel's storm would break. But tonight, Clara sat alone, a silent witness to her own heartbreak. And as the narrator's voice emerged once more, it echoed her loneliness with haunting clarity: there is no isolation deeper than being unseen by those you love most. A mother's tears do not fall for herself, but for the bond that should have been sacred, yet lies shattered in silence. The wedding suite was silent. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed in his tailored suit. The tie was loosened, the boutonniere wilted, yet he hadn't moved since the door had closed behind them. The golden glow of the lamps lit half his face, while the other half was hidden in shadow, a reflection of the storm raging within him. Madison stood before the mirror, carefully removing her earrings. She looked radiant, almost untouchably beautiful, her gown flowing like white firelight. To anyone else, she was the picture of perfection, a young bride beginning a new chapter of her life. But to Daniel, the image fractured, like glass cracking beneath too much weight. He saw not just a bride. He saw the sharpness in her words. The arrogance that spilled at the altar. The way she had diminished her own mother, a woman Daniel had come to admire quietly from afar. He tightened his fists against his knees. The silence between them grew heavier by the second. Madison finally turned, smiling faintly. "Well," she said, her voice tinged with pride, "we made it through. Did you see how perfect everything was? Everyone loved the ceremony." Daniel's eyes lifted slowly to hers. His voice was quiet but laced with steel, "Not everyone loved it." Madison blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Everything went exactly the way it was supposed to. The flowers, the vows, the music, the way you spoke to your mother." His words cut through hers like a blade. "The way you dismissed her, right there in front of everyone. Madison, do you realize what you did?" Her smile faltered. A defensive edge sharpened her tone. "She doesn't belong in this world, Daniel. Look around you, this isn't her place. My wedding was supposed to be perfect, elegant. She doesn't fit." Daniel stood now, his chair scraping softly against the floor. His height towered over her, but it was not intimidation. It was anguish, disappointment, a quiet fury he could no longer contain. "She doesn't fit," he repeated, his voice breaking slightly. "That woman raised you. She gave everything so you could stand in this dress tonight. And you stood there, on the most sacred day of your life, and humiliated her." Madison's cheeks flushed red. She crossed her arms, her pride hardening into armor. "You don't understand. I grew up watching her struggle. She was always working late, never around. Always tired, always wearing those same cheap clothes. I was embarrassed, Daniel. Do you know what it's like to be the girl in school whose mother couldn't afford the right shoes? Who could never host the sleepovers because our house was too small, too poor?" Her voice cracked slightly, anger tangled with old wounds. "I swore I would never be her. That I would never let my life look like that." Daniel's chest tightened. He saw, for a brief moment, the broken little girl inside her, ashamed, longing, desperate to escape. But her escape had twisted into something else: arrogance, cruelty, blindness. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You wanted better for yourself. That I understand. But better does not mean forgetting the hands that carried you here. Madison, your mother worked herself to the bone so you could have choices. And instead of honoring her, you erased her." Madison turned away, staring at her reflection again. But the mirror no longer comforted her. For the first time that night, she saw not a flawless bride, but a fractured daughter. Still, her pride refused to crumble. "You're exaggerating," she whispered. "She'll be fine. She always survives." Daniel's eyes darkened. His jaw clenched. "Survives? Do you know what I saw tonight? A woman sitting alone while the world celebrated around her. A mother who swallowed her pain so her daughter could shine. And you didn't even glance her way." The silence that followed was unbearable. Madison's reflection wavered in the mirror as tears began to prick at the corners of her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. Daniel turned away, running a hand through his hair. His chest felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were pressing against him. He had loved Madison. Truly, deeply. He had admired her ambition, her beauty, her determination. But tonight, he saw the cost of that ambition, and it terrified him. Could he share a life with someone who carried such disdain for love in its simplest form? Could he build a future with someone who discarded the very person who had given her life? His thoughts spiraled, the weight of truth pressing harder with each breath. He moved toward the window, pulling the curtain aside. Outside, the garden shimmered beneath the moonlight. And there, far below, he caught sight of Clara's figure in her own window, sitting quietly, her face tilted toward the night sky. Even at this distance, Daniel could sense her solitude. Her sorrow. Her strength. It pierced him. In that moment, he felt a pull stronger than anything he had ever known. A pull not of romance, but of reverence. A deep, aching respect for the woman who had endured so much in silence, who had been cast aside yet still stood with grace. Daniel closed his eyes, a whisper escaping his lips, unheard by Madison, "She deserved better." Behind him, Madison spoke again, her voice trembling between defensiveness and fear. "Daniel, why are you making this about her? This was our wedding. Our night. Don't let her ruin this for us." He turned, his eyes steady, unwavering. "She didn't ruin anything, Madison. You did." The words landed heavy, echoing in the room like thunder. Madison's face paled, her lips trembling. For the first time, the foundation of her pride cracked. Daniel stepped closer, his voice quieter now, but firm. "I need you to understand something. Love without respect is hollow. Success without gratitude is empty. If you cannot honor the woman who gave you everything, how will you ever honor anyone else? Even me?" The silence between them deepened. Madison's tears finally slipped free, sliding down her cheeks, smudging the perfect makeup she had clung to like armor. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes. Daniel's heart ached at the sight, but he knew this moment mattered. It was a crossroad, the point where truth could no longer be buried beneath appearances. As he stood there, torn between the love he once felt and the truth he could no longer ignore, the narrator's voice rose, solemn and piercing. "When love collides with truth, the heart is torn. But some truths cannot remain silent, no matter how painful their echo. For in silence, love becomes a lie." And Daniel could no longer live with lies. The night grew heavier, pressing against the walls of the bridal suite like a storm waiting to break. Daniel hadn't moved from the window. Madison sat on the edge of the bed, her gown spread across the sheets like a suffocating cloud. Between them lay a silence sharp enough to cut skin. But silence, when stretched too thin, has a way of shattering. And in that shattering, truth demands its voice. Madison spoke first, her voice brittle. "Daniel, why are you doing this to me? To us? This was supposed to be the happiest night of our lives." Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the moonlit garden below. His chest rose and fell slowly, as though he were carrying a weight far too heavy to drop. "This isn't about tonight, Madison. It's about everything leading to tonight. About who you are, and who you're becoming." She flinched, his words striking deeper than she expected. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but before she could, Daniel turned from the window, his gaze steady, burning with a clarity she could no longer avoid. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "Something I've carried with me for months." The air shifted. Madison's stomach twisted, a sick fear rising inside her. She had lived her whole life controlling every detail, every outcome, but the look in Daniel's eyes told her she was about to face something she couldn't control. She tried to laugh it off, though her voice trembled. "What is this? Some kind of lecture? You sound like my father." Daniel didn't flinch. "No. This isn't a lecture. This is the truth." He stepped closer, his voice low but unshakable. "From the very first time I met your mother, I saw her strength. Her grace. Her sacrifices. Madison, I saw in her everything that you refused to acknowledge. And I couldn't understand how a daughter could carry so much resentment for a woman who gave her everything." Madison's throat tightened. "Stop," she whispered, her voice trembling now. But Daniel didn't stop. He couldn't. The dam had broken. Every smile she gave you was filled with pain she never showed. Every dollar she earned, every night she went without sleep, it was all for you. And still, you belittled her. You mocked her. You tried to erase her from the very picture of your life. And Madison, that crushed me." Tears welled in Madison's eyes, but they were not soft tears. They were angry, desperate, fighting against the truth clawing its way into her heart. "You don't understand what it was like growing up with her. She was never enough. She was weak. Daniel's voice rose for the first time that night, sharp and commanding. No. She was not weak. She was stronger than both of us combined. The weakness is in pretending her sacrifices don't matter. The weakness is in pride so blinding it destroys the very love it was built on. Madison shook her head violently, her earrings catching the lamplight like sparks. She felt the walls closing in, the life she had built, the perfect image, the flawless bride, the dream she had constructed, collapsing under the weight of Daniel's words. And then Daniel spoke the words that would break her world completely. I can't ignore it anymore. I can't marry into a life that dishonors the very essence of love. Madison. I don't know if I can stay. The ground beneath her seemed to vanish. Her hands trembled, clutching at the gown as if holding onto fabric could keep her life intact. No. Daniel, please. You can't mean that. We're married. We vowed. You love me, you said you loved me. Daniel's voice broke, raw with pain. I do love you. God help me, I do. But love without truth is poison. And tonight, for the first time, I saw the poison for what it is. Madison stumbled to her feet, crossing the room in a desperate blur. She grabbed his arm, clinging to him as tears streaked down her cheeks. Please, don't say this. Don't do this to me. I can change, Daniel. I'll make it right. Just, don't leave me. Her words cracked open a vulnerability she had buried for years. For the first time, she sounded less like the proud bride and more like the little girl terrified of being abandoned. Daniel looked down at her, his heart torn between compassion and truth. He gently took her hands from his arm, holding them softly, as if they were glass. I don't want to leave you, he whispered. But something has to break. Either this pride, or us. The room went still. Madison's sobs echoed softly against the walls. In that stillness, another truth surfaced, one she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it herself. Through choked breaths, she admitted the secret she had never dared speak aloud. I hated her because she reminded me of everything I didn't want to be. Poor. Alone. Overlooked. And deep down, I was terrified that if I loved her, I would become her. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, her gown pooling around her like spilled ivory. She wept openly now, not out of anger, but from years of unspoken fear and shame. Daniel knelt beside her, his eyes softening. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And in trying to run from her, he said gently, you became someone else entirely. Someone she wouldn't even recognize. Madison, she didn't want you to be her. She wanted you to be better. But not at the cost of love. The words sank into her like rain into dry earth. For the first time, Madison's tears were not just for herself, they were for Clara. For the mother she had rejected. For the love she had twisted into shame. The narrator's voice pierced the silence, weaving over the scene. There comes a moment in every life when truth can no longer be silenced. When pride is stripped bare, and the heart must choose, cling to the mask of perfection, or shatter it to reveal the brokenness beneath. Tonight, Madison's mask cracked. And in that breaking, the secrets she carried began to unravel. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her as she wept. His embrace was not of a lover, not yet, but of a witness. A witness to the breaking of chains too long carried. Yet even as he held her, a shadow lingered in his heart. Love had spoken truth, yes, but whether that truth would heal or destroy them both, only time would decide. The wedding celebrations had ended hours ago. Laughter and music had long faded into silence, replaced now by the distant hum of the night. In the quiet of her small home, Clara sat alone, the glow of a single oil lamp flickering across her tired face. Her dress was plain, the same one she had worn countless times before, patched at the sleeves, frayed at the hem. Nothing about her appearance spoke of celebration. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she had allowed herself to hope, to believe that tonight, her daughter might finally see her. But that hope had dissolved as quickly as it came. Clara's eyes drifted to the tiny framed photograph on the shelf, an old image of Madison as a child, her arms wrapped around Clara's neck, both of them laughing in a moment too fleeting to last. Clara reached out, tracing the glass with trembling fingers. She was so small then, she whispered to herself, her voice breaking. So innocent, so full of love. Where did that little girl go? Her words echoed in the empty room. The silence that followed was unbearable. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the sound of distant voices, the faint remnants of wedding guests still departing into the night. Clara lowered her head into her hands, tears slipping through her fingers as if her soul had grown weary of holding them back. She thought of the ceremony earlier. How Madison had walked down the aisle in her radiant gown, every eye on her. How her own presence had felt like a shadow, tolerated, not welcomed. She remembered the way Madison's glance had brushed past her as though she were invisible, as though the years of sacrifice had left no imprint at all. And Daniel. Daniel's silence lingered in Clara's mind too. His eyes had held something, pain, perhaps, or disapproval. She could not tell. But she sensed that he had seen the truth, even if Madison never would. Clara rose slowly from the chair, her body heavy with exhaustion. She walked to the small wooden chest tucked in the corner of the room. With careful hands, she opened it, revealing neatly folded letters, old photographs, tiny relics of a life lived in sacrifice. She picked up one of Madison's childhood drawings, a crayon picture of the two of them holding hands beneath a crooked sun. In childish scrawl, Madison had written, "Me and Mommy, forever." Clara pressed the paper to her chest, sobbing silently. Forever had turned into something else. Forever had become distance. The narrator's voice whispered over her solitude, "There is no weight heavier than that of a mother's heart. To love without condition, to give without measure, and to be forgotten in the very moment when her love was meant to be honored. This is the sorrow of Clara. A sorrow deeper than loneliness. A sorrow carved by love itself." Clara's mind drifted back to the years of sacrifice. Nights spent working double shifts, her hands blistered and raw. Days spent skipping meals so Madison could eat. The humiliation she endured, the ridicule she suffered, all to keep a roof over their heads. She had done it willingly. Joyfully, even. Because she believed, truly believed, that one day her daughter would understand. That love, no matter how silent, would eventually be seen. But tonight had shown her the truth, sometimes love is not enough. Her tears dried slowly, leaving her eyes red and swollen. She moved to the window and looked out into the night. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the fields. Somewhere out there, Madison was in her bridal suite, surrounded by luxury, wrapped in silks and comfort. Clara, meanwhile, stood in her small, worn house, her body aching, her spirit tired. And yet, despite it all, her heart still whispered one prayer: "Please, God, let her find happiness. Even if I am not part of it." She closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cool glass. In that moment, memories surged, Madison's first steps, her first words, the way she used to cling to Clara's dress when frightened. Every memory was a reminder of the bond they once shared. Every memory was a knife twisting deeper, reminding her of what had been lost. Her whisper broke the silence again. "I wasn't perfect. I know I wasn't. But I tried. Oh, how I tried." The words cracked, fragile as porcelain. She returned to her chair, sinking into it as though the weight of the world pressed upon her shoulders. From a drawer, she pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with letters she had written but never sent, words meant for Madison, confessions of love, apologies for mistakes, blessings for her future. Clara flipped through the pages slowly, her fingers trembling. She stopped on one particular letter, written years ago, when Madison had turned 18, "My dearest Madison, I know you are ashamed of me. I see it in your eyes, though you never say the words. But I want you to know, shame cannot erase love. And though you push me away, though you try to rewrite your story without me, I will always be here. Even if you never look back. Even if you forget me entirely. My love is yours. It always will be." Tears blurred the words, and Clara closed the journal, holding it to her chest as though it were the only thing keeping her alive. The night deepened. The oil lamp sputtered, casting long shadows against the walls. Clara sat in silence, her body curled inward, her heart aching in ways words could never capture. And yet, amidst the sorrow, a strange calmness settled over her. She had given everything she could. She had carried her cross with dignity, even if the world never recognized it. And though her daughter might never say the words, Clara knew in her soul what was true: she had been a good mother. The narrator's voice whispered once more, "Love unacknowledged does not cease to exist. A mother's love is not diminished by rejection. It endures, silent, unseen, but eternal." And though Clara sat alone in the darkness, her love filled the room, vast as the night itself. As the lamp finally flickered out, plunging the room into darkness, Clara lifted her eyes to the ceiling. "Madison," she whispered into the silence, her voice trembling but steady, "I forgive you." The words hung in the darkness like a fragile prayer, unseen, unheard, yet powerful enough to shift the heavens themselves. And with that, Clara folded her hands in her lap, closed her weary eyes, and let the silence embrace her. The wedding was over. The laughter, the applause, the glittering toasts, all of it had vanished into silence. Madison sat alone now, in the grandeur of her bridal chamber, the satin of her gown pooling around her feet like spilled moonlight. The mirror before her reflected not the radiant bride of earlier hours but a woman hollowed by something she could not yet name. Her face was flawless. Every strand of hair still perfectly in place. The jewels on her neck sparkled with the promise of wealth, of status, of belonging. And yet, when she looked into her own eyes, she saw nothing but emptiness staring back. Daniel had been kind all evening, his presence steady, his smile gentle. He had spoken little, though, and when he did, his words carried a weight Madison could not ignore. She remembered the subtle shift in his gaze during the ceremony, the way his jaw tightened when Clara had entered. Clara. The name itself sent a pang through Madison's chest, though she tried to push it away. She rose from the vanity, pacing across the vast room. The floorboards echoed beneath her heels, amplifying the restlessness in her soul. For years she had told herself she was right, that her mother was a burden, an embarrassment, someone who did not belong in the polished life she longed for. But tonight, in the very moment when she should have felt victorious, free, complete, why did she feel only shame? The mirror had not lied. Beneath the beauty, beneath the success, there was a fracture running deep. She thought back to the ceremony. How Clara had walked in quietly, her dress simple, her face marked by years of toil. Madison remembered how her heart had clenched when she first saw her, not with love, but with fear. Fear that others might notice her. Fear that the contrast between mother and daughter would reveal a truth Madison wanted hidden, that she came from hardship, from sacrifice, from a woman who had given everything and received nothing. And yet, when Daniel's eyes had flicked to Clara, when he had nodded almost imperceptibly in recognition, Madison had felt something she could not suppress: guilt. She returned to the mirror, staring harder now, as though it might force her to confront what she had long buried. Images surfaced in her mind, unbidden and relentless. She saw Clara at the kitchen table, her hands cracked and bleeding from work, still smiling as she set a meager meal before her daughter. She saw Clara waiting in the rain outside the schoolyard, holding a torn umbrella, her body shivering but her eyes searching for Madison with love. She saw Clara clutching Madison's hand at night, whispering promises that tomorrow would be better. And then she saw herself, younger, colder, brushing her mother's hand away, rolling her eyes, snapping cruel words born not of truth but of shame. The memories came like waves, and Madison could no longer hold them back. She sank to the floor, the satin gown pooling around her like a cage. Her breath quickened, her chest tightening. Tears began to fall, streaking the carefully painted perfection of her face. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel, truly feel, the weight of what she had done. "Mother," she whispered into the emptiness, the word trembling on her lips like a foreign prayer. "What have I done?" The silence answered her. The narrator's voice slipped into the room, heavy and sorrowful. In the stillness of the night, the heart reveals what pride has long concealed. A daughter who turned her face away now stands before the truth, that love rejected is not love destroyed, but love reflected back as guilt. And guilt, when faced, becomes the first step toward awakening. Madison pressed her palms to her eyes, but the visions would not stop. She remembered the wedding reception, the moment she had deliberately avoided Clara's gaze, the way her mother's shoulders had slumped in quiet defeat. That image now haunted her more than any nightmare could. "She came," Madison whispered through tears. "She still came, after everything." Her voice cracked. For years she had believed her coldness had created distance, that her mother would eventually stop trying. And yet Clara had arrived, humbly, silently, carrying nothing but love. The realization pierced Madison's chest like a blade. Hours passed. The candles in the chamber burned low, their light flickering against the walls. Madison remained on the floor, her gown wrinkled, her crown slightly askew. She no longer looked like a bride, she looked like a child, lost and broken. She rose slowly, moving back toward the mirror. Her reflection startled her now. The jewels, the silks, the makeup, none of it could disguise the truth etched across her face. For the first time, she saw herself clearly. Not as the world saw her, but as Clara must have seen her all these years, a daughter pushing love away, blind to the sacrifice that shaped her very life. And in that clarity, regret bloomed, vast and inescapable. Madison's sobs quieted into whispers. "I was cruel. I was ungrateful. I thought love made me weak. But it was the only strength I ever had." Her voice broke again, and she clutched her chest as though to keep her heart from shattering entirely. The narrator's voice returned, softer now. "Regret is the shadow of love unacknowledged. It haunts not to punish, but to remind, that it is never too late to turn, to see, to remember. The heart that awakens to its own cruelty is the heart that can still be redeemed." Madison stood in silence, her tears drying on her cheeks. She looked at her reflection one last time. No longer did she see the bride of the world's admiration. She saw the daughter of Clara, the daughter who had denied her mother, but who still had a chance, however small, to make things right. And though fear whispered that it might be too late, a deeper voice, fragile, but steady, urged her to hope. She went to the window, pulling the heavy curtains aside. Outside, the night stretched vast and endless, the moon casting silver across the earth. Somewhere, not far away, her mother was alone in her small house, perhaps even crying the same tears. Madison pressed her hand against the glass, her heart aching with longing. "Mother. I see you now," she whispered, her voice carried away into the night. It was not enough. Words spoken to an empty window could not heal years of silence. But it was a beginning, the first crack in the wall she had built between them. And in that crack, a light began to shine. The narrator's final words closed the scene. "The mirror does not lie. It reveals not only the face, but the soul." And as Madison gazed upon her own reflection, she saw not the woman she had become, but the child who had once promised her mother forever. That child still lived within her, waiting for the day when regret would be transformed into love once more. The grand hall had emptied. Guests had departed, their laughter echoing faintly in the night air beyond the stone walls. The music had ceased, the candles had guttered, and only silence remained, a silence heavy enough to crush a man's spirit. Daniel sat alone in the shadows of the ballroom, his hands resting quietly in his lap. The golden ring on his finger gleamed in the dying firelight, a symbol of a promise he had made just hours ago. A promise to cherish, to honor, to remain faithful. And yet, beneath that quiet exterior, his soul trembled. For while the world celebrated his union, Daniel had seen what others had overlooked. He had seen Clara. The moment she entered the church, humble and unassuming, Daniel's heart had faltered. Not because she was out of place, not because she was a ghost of poverty in the midst of splendor, but because her presence unveiled the truth of the woman he had just married. Madison had smiled through the ceremony, her beauty flawless, her confidence unshaken. But Daniel's eyes, trained by years of observing human souls in their quietest agonies, could not be deceived. He had seen the flicker of fear in her gaze when Clara appeared. He had seen her turn her face away, as though her own mother were a stranger. And in that moment, grief rooted itself deep within him. He leaned back against the carved wooden chair, his chest heavy with unspoken words. He did not hate Madison, no, he loved her. He had chosen her, after all. He had seen her intelligence, her ambition, her radiance. But love, true love, required truth. And tonight, he had glimpsed a shadow in her soul, a shadow born not from cruelty, but from denial. Daniel had known hardship himself. He had seen hunger, loss, loneliness. Perhaps that was why Clara's face struck him with such force. He recognized in her the marks of sacrifice, the kind of love that gives without ever asking in return. He recognized, too, the quiet ache of a mother who had been forgotten by her own child. And though Clara had not spoken a word to him, Daniel felt as though she had entrusted him with something sacred, the hope that he might one day help her daughter see. He rose slowly, walking to the tall window overlooking the city. Below, the streets were silent, lamps flickering faintly against the cobblestones. Beyond them, in the poorer quarter, Daniel imagined Clara returning home, alone, her heart carrying both pride and sorrow. He placed a hand on the glass, mirroring the gesture Madison had made in her chamber hours before. But his words were not for himself. "Clara," he whispered, "I saw you. I will not forget you. And though Madison may turn her face away, I will carry your love in my heart until she learns to carry it herself." The narrator's voice slid gently into the scene. A husband's role is not only to protect the home, but to safeguard the soul of the one he loves. And Daniel, though silent, bore a grief too heavy for words, the grief of a man who saw the fracture between mother and daughter, and resolved in secret to heal it. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the silence wash over him. His resolve deepened. He knew he could not force Madison to see, nor could he fill the emptiness she felt with gifts or praise. What he could do was remain steady, patient, a quiet presence reminding her of what she had lost. He thought back to the ceremony. When Clara had entered, their eyes had met for the briefest of moments. No words were exchanged, yet Daniel had understood. Her glance was not of bitterness, nor of accusation, but of plea. A plea that he might be the bridge where she no longer could. That look had pierced him more deeply than any vow. He sat again, this time pulling a small leather-bound journal from his coat. He carried it always, a habit formed in younger years. Opening to a blank page, he began to write. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, as though each word carried the weight of his heart. "Tonight, I married Madison. The world saw beauty, grandeur, joy. But I saw pain hidden beneath her smile. I saw the mother she refused, and the love she denied. And though it is not my place to judge, it is my duty to love, even when love means waiting, even when love means carrying grief in silence. For she is my wife, and I will walk beside her until her eyes open." When he finished, he closed the journal and pressed it to his chest. The fire had nearly died now, its embers glowing faintly, like a heart refusing to extinguish. Time passed. Midnight came and went. Still Daniel sat awake, his thoughts circling endlessly. He remembered the vows spoken at the altar, words uttered with solemnity and hope. For better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, the words felt heavier now than when he had spoken them. He had not known, then, what worse would mean. He had not imagined it would be the chasm between his wife and her mother. And yet, he accepted it. For love was not meant only for easy days. Love was meant for nights like this, nights of grief, of silence, of waiting. At last, he rose, blowing out the final candle. Darkness filled the hall, but Daniel did not fear it. For within himself, he carried a light that would not be extinguished, the light of quiet resolve. He whispered into the darkness, as though speaking to both Clara and Madison at once, "I will not let this love die. Not yours, Clara, nor hers. Even if it takes years, I will hold it until she learns to see it again." His voice was steady, unshaken. And in that vow, unspoken to the world, unheard by his bride, Daniel sealed his secret grief with strength. The narrator's voice closed the scene. Some promises are not made aloud. They are carved into silence, etched upon the heart. Daniel's grief was not the grief of despair, but of love unreturned, love that waits, love that believes, love that endures. And though his wife could not yet see it, his quiet resolve would one day become the anchor that saved her.